the RBA News Center. I am sorry for not making content this week. I've been busy with work and other tasks. So, let's get started. Please rise and remove your hats for the Star Spangled Banner. Please remain standing for the RBA anthem.
Okay. The moment you've all been waiting for. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA's winning the International Retro Bowl. Here we go. Cheer the RBA, black and no red, with something. The Discord is full of best friends. Here we go with Prez Texas leading a group. The RBA's gonna win that World Cup. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA's winning that Retro Bowl. Here we go. We're gonna get 6 points from Dahl. Here we go. Throw it up. Okachie will catch them all. Here we go. At least Mabane has a job and can finally provide for his mom. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA's winning the International Retro Bowl. Here we go. Everyone's playing on medium. Here we go. Which means we're gonna dominate them. Here we go. And if for some reason you need a field goal, you'll get 3 points off of Casper Wyand's toe. He's in the Hall of Fame. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA's winning that Retro Bowl. Here we go. We got Ent, Rams, and Voodoo. Here we go. Also Toasters, Texas, and a Baloo. Here we go. Don't forget Pickles and Gibbons. The only thing you'll regret is not bringing the man with chicken. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. Here we go. RBA. Here we go. RBA's winning that Retro Bowl. Woo! Go team.
Alright, you may be seated. Thank you for the national anthem from USA, and red comments for Here We Go RBA. Alright, let's get on to hello. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Alright, sorry about that. Moving on. Again, welcome to the All Alliance Awards. I don't know what happened there. My mic died for a second. But let's get on to this, because this is what you guys have been waiting for. Starting off with All Foundation. Our second linebacker from the San Jose Crows, Keenan McRae, getting 103 tackles, an interception, and 2 sacks. Next up, first string linebacker from the Death Valley, Chris Zabriskie, I don't know how to say that, with 50 tackles and an interception and 3 sacks. Our defensive back from the San Jose Quackers, Jermaine Dossier, getting 192 tackles and an interception. Our defensive lineman from Death Valley, William Brong, getting 192 tackles, 0 interceptions, and 0 sacks. Our second string wide receiver from the Cloben Straffs, Charlie Bryant, receiving the ball 291 times for a total of 3,103 yards and 39 touchdowns. Our first string wide receiver from Death Valley, Walter Scott, receiving the ball 247 times for a total of 3,482 yards and 43 touchdowns. Next up is our tight end from the San Jose Quackers, Nate Ridley, receiving the ball 65 times for a total of 835 yards and 13 touchdowns. Next up is our running back from Death Valley, Shorty Harris, rushing the ball 291 times and receiving the ball 47 times for a total yardage of just under 2,000 and just over 30 touchdowns. Next up is our quarterback from Death Valley, Pete Ogbury, playing 18 games, completing the ball 508 times for a total of 5,286 yards and 64 touchdowns. Our Red Comet's best team is Death Valley. Next up is our All-Ultimate team. For our kicker from the Utah Winter Storm, Eli Hagman, completing all of his field goals for a total of 208 yards and an average of 41.6, with his longest being 55. Our second string linebacker, also from the Utah Winter Storm, Keenan McRae, playing only 12 games and getting 124 tackles, 4 interceptions, and 2 sacks. Imagine if he played all 19 games. He would have definitely won that sticker. Our defensive back from the Gaming Gamers, Noah Jenkins, playing 18 games, getting 203 tackles and 4 interceptions. Defensive lineman from the Utah Winter Storm, Noah Jenkins. That's wrong. Something's wrong there. I messed up. Our offensive lineman from the Cubbies Kids, Yorick Blow, playing 19 games and getting 65 tackles. Next up is our wide receiver from the Las Vegas High Rollers, Kamoko Ko, playing 19 games, getting 314 tackles for a total of 4,413 yards and 69 touchdowns. Next up is our tight end from the Utah Winter Storm, Leon Grigsby, playing a total of 19 games, receiving the ball 108 times for a total of 1,585 yards and 23 touchdowns. Next up is our running back from the Washington Lizards, Boogie Wood, receiving the ball 168 times for a total of 1,822 yards and 22 touchdowns. Looking at his rushing stats, he also got 7 touchdowns. Our quarterback from the Utah Winter Storm, Aquib however you say that. I don't know how you say that. Our Red Comet's best all-ultimate with 5 players is the Utah Winter Storm. For our all-champions teams, our kicker from the Newark Cherry Blossoms, Kenneth Clemens, completing 100% of his field goals for a total of 310 yards, with his longest being 60. Our linebacker from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves, Ronnie Gallup, getting 120, 231 tackles and 1 sack. Our defensive back, also from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves, Malik Nichols, getting 240 tackles, 2 interceptions, and no sacks. Our defensive lineman from the Arizona Vipers, Roger Rochelle, playing 18 games, getting 216 tackles and 2 interceptions. Our second string wide receiver from the Fighting Beavers, Saquon Schnell, receiving the ball 244 times for a total of 4,148 yards and 56 touchdowns. Our first string wide receiver from the Arizona Vipers, Arthur Kittle, playing 18 games, receiving the ball 486 times for a total of 4,431 yards and 67 touchdowns. Our tight end from the Tonawanda Cardex, Eric Forbes, receiving the ball 124 times for a total of 1,531 yards and 24 touchdowns. Our running back from Aloof Balloon, Dijon Butt II, receiving the ball 150 times for a total of 812 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. However, he rushed the ball 651 times for a total of 3,486 yards and 47 touchdowns. Our quarterback from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves, Dane Puckett, completing 87% of his passes for a total of 8,248 yards and 115 touchdowns. Our Red Comets best all champions with 3 players is the Milwaukee Vaporwaves. Next up is our all-premier team. Our linebacker from Tyrants, Tagli Tell. Our defensive back from the Seattle Sockeyes, Darwin Eagle, getting 261 tackles and 3 interceptions. Our second string defensive lineman from Tampa, Derek Minter, getting 230 tackles and 3 sacks. Our defensive lineman for the Force, Bronco Dent, getting 140 tackles and 6 sacks. Our offensive lineman from the Cambridge Punters, Josh Sanders, getting 63 tackles. Our wide receiver from the Cambridge Punters, Cornell Wilcox, getting the ball 664 times for a total of 87 yards and 92 touchdowns. Our tight end from the New Orleans Voodoo, Hardy Pope, receiving the ball 31 times for a total of 1,111 yards and 17 touchdowns. Our running back from the PA Liberty, Gabe Gasiski, I don't know. I've had a long day. Receiving the ball 152 times for a total of 2,183 yards and 29 touchdowns. Going to his rushing stats, he had rushed the ball 17 times for a total of 41 yards and 11 touchdowns. Our quarterback for the all-premier team from the New Orleans Voodoo, Laquan Wormley, playing 19 games, completing 86% of his passes for a total of 8,939 yards and 154 touchdowns. Our Red Comets best all-premier is the Punters, and I don't know the other team. Next up is our awards, sponsored by the Alliance After Dark. Crowd favorite with 100% of the votes is Aloof Balloons. Best presentation of games with 95% of the votes is the Marching Ents. Most Alliance Spirit with 100% of the votes is Texas Stars. Best Trash Talk with 50% of the votes is PA Liberty. Our quickest submitter is the Murderer Hornets, submitting on 6/9 at noon 22 Eastern Standard Time. It should be daylight time, though. Best conference with 8,172 regular season points is the West. Mr. and Miss Irrelevant with a negative 423 points is the Commanders. Our Rookie of the Year with 533 regular season points is the Businessmen. Our regular season champions and the Foundation is the Businessmen with 533 points. And the Ultimate League is the Memphis Pharaohs with 479 points. In the champions, it's the Milwaukee Vaporwaves with 579 points. And in the Premier is the New Orleans Voodoo with 857 points. Finally, it's what we've been waiting for. It marks that we're over halfway with this presentation, which I'm happy about. It's our All Alliance teams. Starting off with our second team. Our kicker from the Peshtigo Fire in the Champions League is Arthur Pulley, completing 100% of his field goals for a total of 164 yards and his longest is 57 yards. Our second string linebacker from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves in the Champions League is Ronnie Gallup, getting 231 tackles and a sack. Our first string linebacker from the Isotopes in the Premier West is Lionel Blunt, getting 190 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 2 sacks. Our second string defensive back from the Tyrants in the Premier West is Byron Jones, getting 259 tackles and an interception. Our first string defensive back from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves in the Champions League is Malik Nichols, getting 240 tackles and 2 interceptions. Our second string defensive lineman from the Wichita Riders in the Premier East is Cameron Rose, getting 223 tackles and 5 sacks. Our first string defensive lineman is from the Scotty Booners in the Premier West is Tyree Scaffold, getting 271 tackles and 2 sacks. Our second string offensive lineman from the Cambridge Punters in the Premier East is Camus Doolin, getting 53 tackles. Also from the Cambridge Punter, the first string offensive lineman in the Premier East is Josh Sanders with 63 tackles. Our second string wide receiver from the Arizona Vipers in the Champions League is Arthur Kittle, receiving the ball 486 times for a total of 4,431 yards and 67 touchdowns. Our first string wide receiver from the Idaho Falls Kangaroos in the Premier West is Kyron Riley, receiving the ball 332 times for a total of 4,748 yards and 64 touchdowns. Our second string tight end from the Tonawanda Cardex in the Champions League is Jeffrey Jackson, receiving the ball 135 times for a total of 1,652 yards and 19 touchdowns. Our first string tight end from the Red Comets in the Premier East is Gene Connor, receiving the ball 107 times for a total of 1,455 yards and 22 touchdowns. Our second string running back from Tampa in the Premier East is Curtis Horsted, receiving the ball 136 times for a total of 2,030 yards and 26 touchdowns. Looking at his rushing stats, he rushed the ball 30 times for a total of 104 yards and 6 touchdowns. Our first string running back from the Seattle Sockeyes in the Premier West is Malcolm Butler, receiving the ball 139 times for a total of 1,842 yards and 28 touchdowns. Going to his rushing stats, he rushed 26 times for a total of 86 yards and 14 touchdowns. Our second string quarterback from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves in the Champions League is Dane Puckett, completing 87% of his passes for a total of 8,248 yards and 115 touchdowns. Our first string quarterback from the Isotopes in the Premier West is Callan Street, completing 90% of his passes for a total of 8,027 yards and 121 touchdowns. Now is our first team All-Alliance. Our kicker from the Newark Cherry Blossoms in the Champions League is Kenneth Clemens, completing 100% of his field goals for a total of 310 yards, with his longest being 60. Our second string linebacker from the Tyrants in the Premier West is DK Smith, getting 223 tackles and an interception and a sack. Our first string linebacker, also from the Tyrants in the Premier West, is Tagley Tell, getting 212 tackles, an interception, and 3 sacks. Our second string defensive back from the Gaming Gamers in the Ultimate League is Noah Jenkins, getting 203 tackles and 4 interceptions. Our defensive back 1 from the Seattle Sockeyes in the Premier West is Darwin Eagle, getting 261 tackles and 3 interceptions. Our defensive lineman, second string from Tampa in the Premier East, is Derek Minter, getting 230 tackles and 3 sacks. Our first string defensive lineman from Forest in the Premier East is Bronco Dent, getting 140 tackles and 6 sacks. Our second string offensive lineman from the Gaming Gamers in the Ultimate League is Benny Waynes, getting 62 tackles. Our first string offensive lineman from the Cubbies kits in the Premier East is Uric Blow, getting 65 tackles. Our second string wide receiver from the Las Vegas High Rollers in the Ultimate League is Kamoko Ko, getting 314 receptions for a total of 4,413 yards and 69 touchdowns. Our first string wide receiver from the Cambridge Punter in the Premier East is Cornell Wilcox, getting the ball 664 times for a total of 6,787 yards and 92 touchdowns. Our second string tight end from the Utah Winter Storm in the Ultimate League is Leon Grigsby, getting the ball 108 times for a total of 1,585 yards and 23 touchdowns. Our first string tight end, also not from the Utah Winter Storm, I need to fix that, is Hardy Pope, receiving the ball 31 times for a total of 1,111 yards and 17 touchdowns. Our second string running back from the PA Liberty in the Premier East is Gabe Gekski, receiving the ball 152 times for a total of 2,183 yards and 29 touchdowns. In his rushing stats, he rushed the ball 17 times for a total of 41 yards and 11 touchdowns. Our first string running back from Maloof Balloons in the Champions League is Dijon Butt II, receiving the ball 150 times for a total of 5 touchdowns and 812 yards. His rushing stats, though, is what got him in this place, getting 651 rushes for a total of 3,486 yards and 47 touchdowns. Our second string quarterback from the New Orleans Voodoo in the Premier West is Laquan Wormley, completing 86% of his passes for a total of 8,939 yards and 154 touchdowns. Our first string quarterback, not from the Chicago Rams, I need to fix that, is Dane Pukic, playing 18 games, completing 87% of his passes for a total of 8,248 yards and 115 touchdowns. I'll fix that. Our best players. Our foundation most valuable player from Death Valley is Chris Zabarski, getting 50 tackles, 1 interception, and 3 sacks. Our ultimate MVP is from Utah Winter Storm, Aquib Jabau. Our Champions MVP from the Loof Balloons is Dijon Butt II. Our Premier MVP from the New Orleans Voodoos in the West is Laquan Wormley. Our Defensive Player of the Year from the Seattle Sockeyes in the Premier West is Darwin Eagle. Our Offensive Player of the Year from the Utah Winter Storm in the Ultimate League is Aquib Jinbunau. And for our Deshaun Dull Award from Aloof Balloon in the Champions League is Dijon Butt II. That is all for me in this edition of the RBA Awards ceremony. Thank you for watching.